All right, I'd like to begin by thanking Hawthorne and Chuck for inviting me to join the Growing Wellness Group today in a discussion of recognizing and responding to someone with thoughts of suicide. My name is Chris Frakes. I'm the program director for SWCAP's Farmer Wellbeing and Suicide Prevention Program. SWCAP is a community action program that works in the southwestern corner of the state in 5 counties primarily. My interest in and concern to support farmers facing hard times goes back to the farm crisis of the 1980s. I came to adulthood just as that crisis was really hitting its peak. And as it took hold in Iowa, in the area where I grew up, it was really very concerning. You know, in that particular farm crisis, we saw interest rates skyrocket, we saw land values fall, and we saw a lot of generational farms that had never before had financial trouble go under. And the emotional impact of those farm struggles was also very alarming to see, as farmers who were very accustomed to taking care of their own business didn't really have the resources that they needed to grapple with the emotional impact of that farm crisis. I remember watching my own uncles, for example, who came within a hair's breadth of losing the home place, and the kind of emotional impact that they internalized. Farm families are not always very well equipped to talk about hard emotional issues, especially things like depression, suicide, anxiety, any of those. And I think it's really critical that we learn to have these conversations in order to provide better mental health supports to members of our agricultural community. I would like to start this presentation with a short disclaimer that here I'm only able to provide a very basic overview of responding to someone who's experiencing thoughts of suicide. I will give throughout the presentation additional training and support resources. I'll also go through some different resources that now exist at the end of the presentation. Sometimes hearing about suicide can be triggering for folks who have themselves struggled with this issue or survived the suicide of a loved one. If that is the case for you, please know that there are resources available immediately if you need to talk. The National Lifeline, 1-800-273-TALK is available. That's 8255. There are also frequently crisis hotlines in your own counties, or you could always dial 911. I will also provide my contact information at the end of this presentation if anyone wants to reach out to me. I want to begin, before we get directly into the topic of responding to someone with thoughts of suicide, to talk about some of those risk factors that can lead up to that sort of a crisis. And so I want to talk about learning to recognize and respond to significant stress, both within ourselves and within other people that we might be in contact with. And so when we think about stressors that could lead into a mental health crisis, we need to be looking at physical signs of stress, behavioral signs of stress, and then there are also some signals that we can glean by looking at on-farm or farmstead signs of stress. I'm going to go through each of those in turn. Now, it's true, right, that we all face stressors in our lives, both acute, sort of short-term stressors and more chronic or long-term stressors. And certainly being in this pandemic is giving us all sorts of stressors on a daily basis. And the particular political climate that we're in currently, with the challenges around the election, with the racial reckoning that's been going on, right? These are all additional stressors that we're facing. And so it's important to be paying attention when stress starts to become more unmanageable. And then that's when we need to reach out for assistance. So physical signs of stress can include things like changes in our weight or our appetite. So either eating more or eating way less than we do normally, More frequent illnesses can be an indicator of stress if we start to get a lot of colds. And of course, again, in the middle of a health pandemic, we are all sort of triggered to be worried about every sniffle maybe being COVID. We might also notice that, and again, sleep is critically important to our physical and mental well-being. And so changes in sleep is something that we need to address. People who are experiencing a lot of stress may have chronic stomach aches, they may clench or grind their teeth, they may experience chest pain or a racing heart rate, and they may start to exhibit poor hygiene, where they are maybe not washing their hair or changing their clothes, if they're starting to be under really chronic stress or moving towards depression. Now, of course, a number of those things on that list also could have physical underpinnings, right? So if you're experiencing things like chest pain, insomnia that's not resolving, rapid loss of weight, any of those things are things that should be checked out by your primary care physician to make sure that there's not something physiological going on with you. Behavioral signs of stress that can become worrisome have to do with if somebody starts to worry a lot about things that they didn't worry about before. So this could be a real preoccupation with things outside of one's control, or a word that I just learned recently is doom scrolling, which I have to say I'm somewhat guilty of. Where you just move from topic to topic to topic, right? That's one disaster after another, the rates of COVID here, the rates of COVID there. That sort of preoccupation and with doom scrolling can actually significantly increase your stress. And so setting boundary around your media consumption can be really important. People who, other behavioral signs might be a loss of interest in hobbies or activities people have typically enjoyed, withdrawing from social interactions. And again, in the middle of a pandemic, we have to note that where normally we would say if people suddenly withdraw from their community activities, or people suddenly who always went to church suddenly stop going to church, those would be normal. We would look at those and say, something's going on with this person. In the pandemic, right, it may just simply be prudent that we're no longer interacting in public with people. And so there has to be some nuanced evaluation of what's happening if folks are withdrawing. On the other hand, we know that social connection is one of our primary protectors from a lot of different mental health crises, including thinking about suicide. And so we do want to be checking in with people who are withdrawing from social circles. Other changes, behavioral changes, might be significant changes in routine, poor concentration, easy forgetfulness, trouble making decisions, increased conflict in relationships, and then feeling sad or nervous or unusually irritable. And then additionally, we need to be thinking about our consumption patterns, whether that's smoking or caffeine or using prescription drugs or recreational drugs. If our consumption patterns around maybe maladaptive coping strategies starts to really accelerate, that is also a warning flag that we want to be paying attention to. Finally, then, some of the farmstead indicators of stress that's becoming unmanageable is when we see significant declines in the state of the farmstead. So most farmers have sort of that farm first attitude, right? Take a lot of pride in how their buildings look, how the state of their animals, the hedgerows, all of these things. So if we start to see a farm that has historically been kept in good order, have broken down equipment that's not being attended to, that stays in the yard for weeks on end, or the condition of the animals on the farm starts to decline. They're muddy, they're unwell, they seem underfed. Or buildings that aren't being repaired. Again, those are significant signs of stress that's unmanageable with the farm family. And we can also see this sometimes with children. Children will begin to act out in school or withdraw from activities. Again, putting an asterisk next to it because of the pandemic and school activities that may be canceled anyway. What I want to go through now are 5 steps you can take. So if you've noticed that somebody you care about is exhibiting some of those risk factors, they have one or more of those different kinds of evidences of significant stress, and you begin to suspect that it's not just stress, but something more significant is going on, and maybe they are starting to have thoughts of suicide. We've got 5 steps that anyone can take. So this is drawn from Mental Health America in SAMHSA and their Be the One To campaign. So the first step is to simply ask, are you thinking of killing yourself? And the question needs to be posed that directly, and most of us find that to be an uncomfortable question to pose to somebody. But we need to say it that directly so that we're clear what we're talking about, right? Simply saying, are you thinking about hurting yourself is not sufficient because it won't get us the right information, right? That's not the same thing as, are you thinking about killing yourself? After you ask, and I'm going to emphasize this a couple of times, after you ask, it's important that you really take the time to listen. Ask them to tell you their story. What is causing them so much pain? Why are they feeling like this? What has happened? What has changed? And really sit and listen to their story. Making that social connection, making that space without interruption and with compassion is really an important first step. As you listen, one of the goals will be to help the person you're talking to identify and focus on the reasons they have for staying alive. Notice that I'm saying it's their reasons, right? What is not helpful is for you to start generating a bunch of reasons why they should stay alive, right? So we're trying to listen for the reasons they have for staying alive and helping to anchor into those touch points. You know, one of the things that people frequently worry about when they're faced with a situation where somebody might be having thoughts of suicide is they think if they ask the question that either the person will become angry with them or that the person that you might be planting seeds somehow in their mind. Evidence shows that neither thing is true, right? It's pretty rare for somebody to become angry, and you will assuredly not be planting a seed. If somebody's already thinking of suicide, they're already thinking about it. So really what evidence shows us is that when somebody is asked directly, if they are in fact having thoughts of suicide, they will feel relieved because finally somebody has noticed how much distress that they're in. The second step is to help keep the person safe. So if someone tells you that they are having thoughts of suicide at some point in that conversation, it's good to figure out, do they have a plan and do they have access to means? And if the answer to both of those is yes, then we want to figure out a plan to help keep them safe. You may be in a position to offer to temporarily take possession of whatever their means are. So that could be taking possession of a gun, taking possession of pills, or something that they intend to take an overdose with. It may be that you're going to need to get some additional assistance from other family or friends. It may be that we need other kinds of assistance, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But if you can, you want to help them formulate a plan to keep safe. And that could be also formulating a plan like, who could you call when you are feeling really desperate, right? And getting a list of people that they can call and phone numbers, or making sure that they're in their contacts in their phone. If at any point you think there is an imminent risk of harm, you may need to drive them to an ER to have them evaluated, or you may need to call 911 depending on the circumstances. And we can talk about the ways that calling 911 can sometimes be, having police come onto a farm sometimes escalates the situation. We can talk about that during our discussion, but sometimes it is an option that needs to be exercised. If you're uncertain what to do, you're stuck, you don't know how to keep them safe, you don't know how to formulate a plan, calling that suicide lifeline is always a great option because there are trained folks on the other end of the line who can help make a safety plan. The third step in this process is to simply be there. So again, the goal here is to listen to the story, invite them to tell you what is happening. And if you feel like I really can't, like I can ask the question and yes, they're in pain and yes, they have thoughts of suicide, but you feel like you're not able to be the one listening to the story, then you need to stay with them until you can find somebody who can hear the story. Again, you could call the lifeline, you could bring in additional support people. As you're listening, try and listen with empathy and compassion, without judgment, and certainly without dismissing what they're telling you. Might make you very uncomfortable. And so it's okay to recognize that within yourself, right? To say internally to yourself, wow, I don't know if I'm doing this right. I'm really nervous. I'm really anxious. What if I say the wrong thing, right? So just acknowledge that to yourself, and that can help you sort of get grounded again so that you can continue to have the conversation. The most important thing, right, more than knowing exactly what the right thing to say is, the most important thing is to simply be there and listen and be a non-judgmental presence. The fourth step is to help the person connect other resources. So, this campaign is called the Be the One To, but the reality is we need broader safety nets, right? This can't, supporting people's mental health and well-being can't rely on any one of us. We need broad networks and coalitions and friends and resources, professional resources sometimes, folks who can help us. So helping people who are struggling with thoughts of suicide to build a network of others is really important. So you should ask them, right? Who do you trust? Who else could you reach out to? Who else would you be willing to talk to? That may be a family member, that may be a friend, it could be a religious leader or a neighbor, it may be a professional counselor. Any of those or all of those are good resources. As you're sitting with them, it might be useful if you would say, can we call, right? If they've identified, say, their religious leader, can we call your pastor right now and get you connected into a conversation with them? Help them to make a reach out to an additional source of support beyond yourself. The fifth step is to follow up. So after you've connected the person into additional resources, it's important to reach back out to them in a few days or over the next several weeks. And it can be simple things. It can be a text, hey, I'm thinking about you. I hope you're doing okay today. It could be a handwritten card. It could be a phone call. If we ever get back to meeting people in person, you could go by. Telling them that you're thinking about them. That can have a powerful impact on helping people reaffirm their desire to stay alive. So knowing that other people's care about you, right, that's really good and supportive of your own well-being. So again, to review our 5 steps, right, are ask clearly and directly what they're struggling with are thoughts of suicide, help to keep them safe, be there, listen to them, let them tell you their story on their own, in their own words, in their own way, help them connect to a broader network, so that it's not just you trying to bear all of this, right? And they are connected into multiple people who care about them, and then follow up. At any point in that process, again, you can always call the lifeline to connect to additional resources. There is also additional information about these steps and why they're effective that can be found on the website, betheone2.com. And I would encourage folks who are interested in this topic to look at that. Now, I want to talk about, as I said at the beginning, this is just the most basic of overviews of how to have suicide awareness and intervention. There are a couple of other online options at the current time that I would recommend. One is a program called LivingWorks Start. It's a 1-hour online training. You do it at your own pace. And it's livingworks.net/start. I think it costs about $20 right now to take that training, but it's an excellent training. They have little vignettes that they have you work through. It gives you a lot of information and practice with this sort of, I don't know, AI system somehow that is responsive to what you say. There are also about an 1.5-hour training called QPR, Question, Persuade, Refer. Because of the pandemic, we can now offer that online. And so trained QPR trainer. I'm happy to have folks join me in that longer training. Normally we would do that program in communities, in person. And then the SWCAP will be in the spring sometime, we will be having a longer 4-hour training called Safe Talk that we will also be making available to folks. Here are some additional resources around Wisconsin for folks. Harvest of Hope is a good resource that provides small emergency grants to pay for things like maybe if folks are having trouble paying bills, there's a small grant you can pay for. Extension has a lot of resources related to farm stress. There are national resources, the Farm Aid Hotline and the Farm Crisis Center are both national resources, and then again, the Lifeline. I want to just make a very short plug about another project I'm involved with called Project Recovery, that's providing emotional support and education for farmers, farm workers, and their communities who've been negatively impacted by the pandemic and who are feeling stressed. So this is the folks who are the outreach workers who are part of this are not necessarily focused on suicide, but just on broader stress reduction techniques and helping people set priorities. It's a free, confidential, anonymous support that's available. We've got the phone number there on the screen for the line that goes directly to support for farmers. It's 888-327, farm help is what it spells out, 6435. A final resource I want to make sure everyone knows about, this is a new service by the Wisconsin Farm Center. They now have a 24/7 farmer wellness hotline that's available. The Farm Center, it's run through the Department of Agriculture. They also have counseling vouchers available to farmers for free counseling sessions in person. And they also have telecounseling appointments available that are free for farmers as well. So there's a host of resources out there that can help support folks who are feeling stressed or dealing with depression and anxiety and thoughts of suicide. My contact information is there on the screen. If you want to be in contact with me, you are welcome to do that. That is the end of my presentation. So I'm going to stop my screen share and we can move to the discussion.